Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where in the world you are. Welcome to our first webinar of the spring season, which we're calling CapEx Lightning Rounds. As you may have read, our objective with these is very simple. It's to provide practical, thoughtful information and ideas that you can use right away and do so quickly so you can get back to what you're doing and make the most of it. Today's session is Outmaneuvering Tariffs and Inflation, the New Rules of Capital Allocation. And it features an amazing speaker, Kyle Fraser, COO, CFO of Agilian Systems. And I'll tell you more about him in just a moment. First, some quick housekeeping notes. This session will last approximately 30 to 40 minutes. If you have any questions, please ask them using the Q&A button, which you'll see on the right of your screen. And you can view the webinar in full screen and thus avoid distractions by clicking the brackets icon in the right-hand corner of the presentation window, which makes it easier to see, particularly when we look at some software and some charts. So if we're all set, let's get going. So here's today's agenda. We'll provide a one-slide overview of Finario for those who are new to our events like this. We'll share a rapid-fire review of what's trending, of particular interest to those in finance and operations. We'll bring in Kyle for our discussion of how to navigate uncertainty using proven techniques such as wargaming, which is super interesting. And lastly, we'll leave you with 3 ways that CapEx stakeholders can specifically adapt to the times, and very briefly show you how to put those techniques to practice within Finario. So here's a very quick intro to Finario. Our platform is the industry-leading enterprise CapEx software solution that connects your people, your projects, and your systems for an accurate view of all capital project activity and options, which, as we'll be talking about in a few minutes, couldn't be more important than at times like this. We're the only solution that covers the full CapEx life cycle, as you can see in the chart to the top right, from sandbox ideation through the entirety of the planning and budgeting process, dynamically automated request and approval workflow, project forecasting, and post-completion reviews, which is something a lot of our customers and prospects talk about. We integrate with your ERP, whether it's SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, or other system. And we also integrate with a host of other solutions like OneStream, Kyriba, and Procore, so we can fit seamlessly in your finance stack. And many of the best companies around the globe, such as those that you see listed here, are Finario users. We're in 70 plus countries across more than 30 industries. And at any given moment, we have billions of dollars, euros, and yen being managed in our system. So that's the super quick summary. I promised it would be short. So now on to our rapid fire summary of trending topics, which is going to become a recurring feature of our Lightning Round series. So here's a view of what CEOs were talking about in Q1 2025. No major surprises here: tariffs, uncertainty, agentic AI. What did jump out to us is the concerns about hiring freezes. It's a casualty for sure of uncertainty, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on, as this and rifts or reductions in force put more strain on resources, which frankly are already short on talent, as we've heard over and over again over the last 2 years, and raise the bar for digital transformation. Another survey by Business Roundtable echoed this, as you can see with the arrows on the right, citing that executives are forecasting a significant increase in the likelihood to decrease their staff. The survey also points to another shift, an expectation that capital expenditures will decrease, which is a reversal from what was widely expected going into the year. Changes in projected CapEx spending varies from industry to industry, of course, but as you can see here, utilities and technologies, which is to be expected because of the impact of data centers, are certainly on the rise. while other categories like paper and packaging and metals and mining are now projected to decrease. It will be interesting for sure to see how this sentiment will have changed in Q2 as we expect it might. Lastly, in this section, based on a review of current research and speaking to our own customers and prospects, here are some trends specific to capital planning that we think are worth watching for our CapEx stakeholders. Number one, keep an eye out for rising variances between forecasts and actuals as it impacts ROI assumptions. And this is something we'll be looking at, taking a deeper dive on in the back half of this presentation. Number two, the impact of tariffs may put some suppliers in a bind, which may compel them to try and revise their contracts, and they may do so in ways that are transparent, and then they may try to do so in ways that may be a tad surprising. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. So many companies have buffer stock inventory. That's just a fancy way of saying loaded up on inventory proactively in advance of any potential tariffs, which can be very strategic, but it also has to be very careful because you don't want to have an abundance of inventory without the sales velocity to match it. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Suppliers, particularly those that are smaller or offshore, may be facing some margin pressure and then as a result become less reliable, or worse, deprioritize your orders. So we're advocating, particularly those in operations, to keep an eye on that and make sure that you're getting what you need, and if not, looking for alternatives. And that's something we'll also be talking about. 5, with uncertainty often comes friction among global business units, given their competing priorities or circumstances. Obviously, this is something that may exist even in times of relative certainty, but if you want to keep your organization aligned strategically and all marching to the same beat, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on as the specter of uncertainty rears its head. 6 is that growth projects are often the victims of volatility, which can be detrimental in the long run, and that's something we've seen time and time again throughout recent memory or history. We like to say, if you're going to cut fat, not muscle. The opposite, which can be detrimental, is cutting muscle and not fat. So definitely something as you look to potentially reallocate money or to reorganize or reprioritize your capital project portfolio, is to do so with the best information, the best data, and the best priorities in order, which is something we work with every day. And then last but not least, amidst all the uncertainty, there can be prolonged decision paralysis, or what we're calling wait and see-ism. And this is exactly what we want to address now with our featured speaker. So that's our rapid fire. It's time now to bring on Kyle. Kyle, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's going to be a challenge to capture the scope of your experience and expertise, but I'm going to try. And I've written this so I don't screw it up. Kyle Fraser is COO and CFO at Agilian Systems, an advisory and technology company that provides risk intelligence to help companies navigate disruption and uncertainty. He advises global enterprises such as Lockheed Martin, Coca-Cola, Blackstone, and J&J, an esteemed group of companies, on how to rethink traditional budgeting and planning models in favor of a more dynamic, data-driven approaches. And he's a leading expert on advanced nuclear energy, which is something I'm keen to learn a little more about. Prior to Agilian, he's held leadership roles in innovation and business development, including spearheading enterprise strategy initiatives for Excel, Energy's think tank, And lastly, Kyle is a frequent speaker and advisor on the future of financial planning, scenario analysis, and the role of real-time intelligence in driving resilient, high-performing organizations. That sound about right? Yeah.
I would hire that guy.
Yeah. All right, I'm for sale. Great. So to kick things off, I did my homework on Agillion, and as I understand it, you guys serve a very unique, diverse range of clients: foreign governments, the military, energy, nuclear infrastructure, and then business sectors such as food and beverage, manufacturing, and pharma. So very diverse. So help us out. How would you summarize what you guys do, and why is providing risk intelligence the common thread to entities as diverse as these? I assume it's because they all have risk.
Yeah, that's the simple answer is every company is going to be facing risk and trying to figure out how to manage it for growth or for overcoming disruption, all of the things that you need to consider when trying to run a company successfully. Um, I would say a lot of the common threads that tie together the entities that we're dealing with is change. If you're a stable company and you know exactly what your target market is and it hasn't changed for years and you don't foresee it changing for years, then you probably don't need our skills immediately. But I don't know a single company that fits into that specific set of criteria. So all of the other ones that we're working with are ones that have a little bit of foresight and know that this is an important topic.
Got it. And so you have a software platform as well as an advisory to components to your business. Tell us a little bit about the software component in terms of being a data source for risk intelligence.
Yeah. So the nuance is that when you go in and you start with advisory services, it's usually a point in time. So I can tell you what the risks are today, but in a few months, those risks are going to have changed. We've had clients that had a very good understanding of what their risks were, and then Russia invaded Ukraine, and that completely disrupted one of their major supply chains, and that threw
Mhm.
them into turmoil. Uh, a lot of things are happening in the world that can cause disruption. I mean, that's why we're here. Obviously, tariffs are causing masses of chaos in very specific parts of the market, as well as just general uncertainty. So we're
Mhm.
finding that there's a lot of opportunity to go in, provide the support, but then once we leave, we don't want to leave the customer on their own. And I think everyone has had interactions with, McKinsey, Bain, whoever, where they come in, they give you something great, but then when they leave, you sort of feel like you're left alone. Our
Mhm.
intent is to overcome that obstacle by providing software that we leave behind that allows the customer to effectively have us in house as long as they need. And then
Hmm.
in the background, we can update the software with the more relevant risks so that once we get in, make sure that we understand the full portfolio of risks, what the actual reactions are to those risks. You have that forever. So it's not a point in time, it's something that we can stay around and support you long term.
Oh, fascinating. So we're here to shed light on how finance and operation teams can outmaneuver, or in military terms, outflank the uncertainty of tariffs, inflation, supply chain disruption, et cetera, particularly as it relates to capital planning. And so one of the things you guys talk about a lot is wargaming, and this is kind of what we've kind of glommed onto here as a very interesting way to look at classic scenario planning, or what if scenario planning is a way to do that. Can you give us a sense of what goes into this, and how, beyond the theory, it can be practically incorporated into capital decision making, or CapEx?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so, wargaming traditionally is very, very well understood in the military. The best practitioners of wargaming on earth are active duty military and recently separated military, because if you don't plan effectively, and if you don't run through the different scenarios, the actual people are going to die,
Right.
to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
So traditional wargaming in the military takes in every aspect of uncertainty, information, all of that, puts it into what they do. They actually get tabletop. So I'm sure everyone knows the game Risk. That's a poor approximation of what wargaming is. So you have little figurines and you try and create what a likely scenario is, and then you throw in everything that can go wrong. So, we're going to do this invasion. If we do it at 6 a.m., the sun's going to be behind us. What if it's raining? What if it's cloudy? What if,
Mhm.
3 of the 5 tanks break down and, we don't have the support we expected? Or communications break down? Or, there are 100
Yeah.
things that you could actually do. So we took that expertise and we tried to morph it such that it would be more applicable to businesses, so that we focus on things like supply chain, geopolitics. We do incorporate a lot of the things that a traditional military would, like a natural disaster, or I mean, what we're dealing with right now is unnatural disasters or man-made disasters. Um,
Mhm.
and then we run a company through different scenarios to pressure test what they have in place. Uh, I can tell you invariably, we find that some of the plans they have are good, and some of the plans are wholly inadequate for some of the challenges that we're facing every day.
Mhm.
That allows the company to understand what they have, what they need to do, and then really incorporate that into the higher picture strategy that they need to incorporate for the future.
Can you give us a sense of where those inadequacies typically lie? Is it assumptions? Is it bias?
Some of
Where
it is not changing with the times. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, some of it is assumptions. There's so much data out there that is hard to parse through. And how do you separate a quality signal from all of the noise?
Mhm.
Uh, that's one of the things that we try to go in and offer using a lot of military techniques, develop something called a PIR, a priority intelligence requirement.
Mhm.
And it's basically a KPI on steroids. So your KPI is, oh, I'm vulnerable to commodity fluctuations in these elements. So we
Mhm.
identify that that is the concern, and then we go to the next level. So what are the things that would cause that? So if you're in copper, what if long term you think that copper is going to go this direction, but we're seeing this because some other elements are impacting the price of copper? So changes in technology, batteries, electricity.
Mhm.
Or maybe there's an earthquake in Chile and a lot of the mines are going to be shut down for 6 months. What is that going to do to you right away? So we look at the next level indicators and use those to try and provide a little bit of foresight for anyone who's in that business.
So if I'm someone who's managing a capital project portfolio or a chemicals company, dairy business, I mean, how do I apply something like that to if I have 400 projects,
Yeah.
versus one big one, right? Where's the practicality of that, would you say, in terms of, do I need to prioritize which of those projects I need to really focus on, or is it a hybrid?
It's a hybrid. I think you can probably, let's take an example of a dairy farmer, right? They're going to have to figure out where their markets are. They're going to have to figure out what their supply chain is to actually continue running the business effectively. If their markets are international, they're going to have to consider what that's going to mean. That's going to be disrupted because the tariffs are going to change the price, and it's no longer affordable to buy milk somewhere where there's a high reciprocal tariff.
Mhm.
Uh, Same with getting your supply. If all of your specialized mechanical parts come from Austria, what is that going to mean? Do you need to stockpile? I mean, the the 7 issues that you brought up earlier are exactly what the people that we've been speaking to are thinking about. There
Right.
is some stockpiling going on. There are people looking for other avenues. And as we were talking about earlier, Rich, it's not going to be easy to just completely change the global supply chain. Um, that is where it presents the opportunity. If you can go in and start to strategically look at where you are exposed, where you might need to shore up some of your spending, then that's going to give you opportunity. And
Mhm.
while a lot of people are pulling back and waiting, that's the exact wrong thing to do. When you do have uncertainty, that's when you need to strike, because that presents the ability to get ahead of your competitors.
Sure.
Um, we've seen a lot of times that inaction is just what leads to companies going from this trajectory to this trajectory. It's risky no matter what. That's the nature of business. But
Mhm.
if you're doing all the right things, it's going to allow you to get ahead of some of those concerns.
Cool. So we got a few more minutes. I know I want to inject the idea of, I know your colleague has written a book about agility. Obviously, that's something we talk about every day. Uh, just the one thing I just want to ask real quick beforehand is, in the world of CapEx, you have your maintenance projects and your regulatory projects and your growth, and it would seem that wait and seeism might be harshest on the growth side of the house than it is on the other two, which is kind of like have to do's versus should do's. Is any advice you can give us about how do you assess the fluctuate? Where do you get the data to assess the fluctuations in the cost of capital, consumer demand fluctuations, other factors that may be harder to predict than, oh, I know my supplier in the Ukraine might be unreliable.
Yeah, no, that's, I think you've hit on where everyone is struggling right now because,
Mm,
as you mentioned, some of the suppliers might be struggling to get raw materials and they might be struggling to get things shipped on time. I think we're
mhm,
just starting to see the front of the iceberg on shipping delays, and uh, we're not sure what the impacts are going to be on that. But what you can do is not stop everything. Obviously, there are certain things you need to continue, but take more time to really think about what the implications are of things as they come up. Uh,
mhm,
we have people on our team who their only job right now is to make sure that they're staying up with the news and trying to think about what some of the headlines are going to mean. And obviously, that's a data rich environment right now because there is so much changing.
right.
Um, what we try to do is take not individual stories and react to those, but entire trends. Now, with the market doing this daily and weekly, it's going to be really hard to identify the specifics of what's going on. But
Mhm,
when you know your business, you can sort of think about what are the things that are within my control to look into. So if you're exposed to the price of oil and gas, it's pretty easy to say, okay, well, we can see where the trend is going with that. I think long term, it's going to have further implications because the United States produces a lot. If there are tariffs to get that out of the United States, the price of oil and gas is going to go down. And then you
mm,
can start to check those trends. Make sure you're watching Brent, make sure you're watching WTI, see what the difference is between those to give an indication of where the market's going to go, and then start to make bets upon that. It's risky, but that's
mhm.
the fun of doing this.
It's kind of like Warren Buffett, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy, right?
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
at least in theory. Last question. What are the leadership characteristics that you've seen across your engagements with clients that are key to adopting agility as an organizational capacity? Because I assume some are just a lot better at it than others, and like most things, it comes from the top.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that we started asking when we began this journey. We identified a few things. So thoughtful, they have to be very thoughtful because if they're not thinking about the big picture, then they're not going to understand the value of planning ahead. Um,
Mhm,
and obviously, you'd hope almost every leader is thoughtful, but we've found that uh, probably about half of the visionary leaders out there are truly thoughtful.
hmm,
Um, next, it's bold. Be willing to take action because, as we were just discussing, if you're not taking action, then your peers and competitors, if they are taking action, they're just leaving you behind. So, decisive action, and that comes
mhm,
from the military mindset as well. We've found that a lot of military leaders they gather information, they make sure that they're trying to weigh everything appropriately. Once they've made a decision, you go. You know,
Right.
every second after you've made the decision is just waste. And
So,
then
yeah.
being willing to, admit that you need help, that you don't know everything. Being humble, those are not traditionally what you think of when you think of a lot of the powerful CEOs, but in fact, all of them go out and get help somewhere, and especially around risk. Risk is such a complicated subject.
Mhm.
Being humble and knowing that you need help on risk, those three things together, those are what makes someone who's really successful in our
Uh,
world.
Real quick, does it apply to middle management as well, or?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, as long as you have the ability to do that, that's
Mhm.
what makes leaders.
Right.
The frontline guys, you want them to have some level of that, but it really makes more of an impact the higher up you go. And middle managers are really, they're the people who run a lot of the organizations. They have
Yep.
more power than they realize. So it certainly
Cool.
applies.
Well, I could talk about this all day. It's so interesting. So maybe we can do it again. When we're doing something that's not a lightning round, we'll do an in-depth deep dive because it's so interesting. Thanks so much. Please stand by. I'm gonna just go into our next section, and if there's any questions, we'll bring you back, or if there are questions that we run out of time on, we'll send them on to whoever asked them individually by email. So our last section in the lightning round is called putting theory into practice. So we just heard a lot about agility, having the right data, the flexibility that's required, the mindset that's required to win the uncertainty game. For CapEx stakeholders, we think there are three best practices, and of course there are many, many others, but there are three that we want to call out this morning, afternoon, evening, that perfectly fit the mold. The first is zero-based budgeting. Whether implemented fully or in principle, the premise is simple, right? Allocate and approve capital from the bottom up based on each project's individual merits versus creating an annual budget that gets increased or decreased a certain percentage each year, and then project owners vie for a slice of the pies if it's some grand competition. With ZBB, as new project proposals are introduced, they can be evaluated not just on typical metrics like IRR, but also quickly changing shifts in strategies and priorities. Dynamic reallocation, we think, is key, and it fits into everything we just spoke about. It's essential to what Gartner coins activist allocation. At its core, it means having the wherewithal to cancel, to pause, to promote projects midstream, to shift dollars to more opportunistic or defensive projects, and so forth. And the thing is, you really can't do this in an environment of spreadsheets or generic systems. You have to have the right data and a holistic view of your project portfolio in order to make agile decision making and dynamic reallocation possible. So something we're very passionate about. And then lastly, and we talked about this in our rapid fire, you need to reassess your ROI and payback assumptions at times like these, because you have to adjust, right? The potential impact of inflation, supply chain disruption, whatever it is, since it might have changed pretty markedly from the time the project or projects were approved. So for about 5, 6, 7 minutes, my colleague Bill Mayo is going to show you now how a platform like Finario can help you do this. Because while those things may seem like a steep hill to climb, they're really far from it when you have a right tool. So while he loads that.